The first thing Peyton felt was the cold, sharp bite of the ceremonial dagger against her throat. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The air, thick with pine smoke and the musky scent of damp fur, pressed against her lungs. Chanting, a low, guttural rhythm in a language she didn't know, vibrated through the packed earth beneath her bare feet. The bonfire roared, casting monstrous, dancing shadows that twisted the faces of the gathered pack into grotesque masks. This was the ritual of the claimed moon, and she was the offering. No, not an offering, a transaction. Her father, Robert's, voice cut through the chant, smooth as oiled steel and just as cold. The blood binds the pact, the daughter for the peace. The Silvermane line honors its word. Peyton's vision swam. The bitter tea they'd forced down her throat an hour ago churned in her stomach, a concoction meant to open her spirit to the moon's will. It felt more like poison. Her limbs were heavy, her thoughts syrup-slow. She was a doll, dressed in a simple white shift that did nothing against the mountain chill, propped up between two of Robert's most loyal enforcers. Jonathan, his beta, stood to the right, his grip on her arm impersonal and unyielding. Across the fire, the rival pack, the Nightfang, watched. They were a sea of dark leather and colder eyes. The treaty was simple, brutal. Her father's pack, the Silvermanes, ceded the northern hunting grounds. In return, the Nightfangs took her. A living seal on the peace, a political bride, a thing. The alpha of the Nightfangs, a grizzled brute named Kale, stepped forward. He was not her betrothed. He was to receive her, then bestow her upon one of his warriors. A prize. The dagger in his hand glinted, the firelight running along the silver edge. It was meant for a symbolic cut, a mingling of her blood with the packed fire. But his eyes, hungry and cruel, promised something less symbolic. "Bring her," Kale growled. Jonathan shoved her forward. The ground tilted. The chanting rose to a fever pitch, the sound becoming a physical pressure in her skull. The tea's effect crested, a wave of dizziness so profound the world dissolved into streaks of light and shadow. She stumbled, the cold air rushing past her. The dagger, the fire, Kale's reaching hand, all blurred. This is it, she thought, the clarity cutting through the haze. I collapse and he catches me, and I am lost. But she didn't fall into Kale's arms. The world snapped back into focus with a jolt of electricity so sharp it burned the fog from her mind. She had collided with a wall of solid muscle, but it wasn't leather-clad. It was warm, and it smelled of winter frost, aged whiskey, and something wild, something that made the primal core of her shiver in recognition. Strong hands caught her, steadied her. They didn't shove or grip. They held. She looked up, and the world stopped. He was taller than any man there, with a presence that didn't push against the space around him but commanded it. Dark hair, swept back, hinted at silver at the temples. His face was all hard lines and severity, a map of authority and restrained power. But his eyes were the color of a storm-racked sky, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. In them, she saw not the appraisal of a warrior looking at a prize, but a shock of recognition so profound it mirrored the one lancing through her own chest. A low, involuntary sound escaped her throat. A whimper, a question. His jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. The chaos of the ritual faded into a distant hum. For a heartbeat, there was only the feel of his hands on her bare arms, the shocking heat of him, and the silent, screaming thread that seemed to pull taut between them. "You!" he breathed, the word so low she felt it more than heard it. "Henry!" The name came from Kale, but it was laced with a new, wary tension. No, not wariness. Fear. Henry, the Alpha King. The rumor, the myth. He ruled all the packs from a distant, fortified territory. He did not attend border skirmish treaties. His presence here was an earthquake. "Release her," Henry said. His voice wasn't loud. It was a quiet, absolute decree that sliced through the chanting and silenced it as effectively as a severed throat. The hands holding her, Jonathan's hands, instantly let go, as if burned. Peyton swayed, but Henry's grip shifted, one arm sliding around her back to support her fully. The contact was a brand, every nerve ending ignited. A chaotic symphony of sensations roared through her. Safety, terror, a dizzying pull, and beneath it all, a rising, ancient song she had no name for. "My king!" Robert spluttered, stepping forward, his smooth facade cracking. "This is a humble treaty right. We did not expect. We are honored, of course, but the girl is part of the—" "The girl," Henry interrupted, his stormy eyes never leaving Peyton's face, "is coming with me." It wasn't a request. It was a fact. The air crackled with his power, an alpha command so potent even the fire seemed to bow in its direction. Peyton felt it in her bones, a resonant hum that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Cale recovered first, his fear morphing into bristling aggression. "The pact! The blood price is agreed. She is Nightfang property now." Henry finally looked away from her, and Peyton could breathe again, though the loss of his gaze felt like a plunge into cold water. He turned his head toward Cale, and the full force of his attention was like a physical blow. Cale, a powerful alpha in his own right, took an involuntary step back. "Your pact is void," Henry stated. "You will leave these lands, all of them, by dawn, or I will consider your presence a challenge to my crown." The gasp from both packs was collective. This wasn't mediation. This was annihilation. Robert's face paled, then flushed with furious humiliation. Jonathan's posture went rigid, his eyes darting between his alpha and his king, a silent calculation happening behind his eyes. "You can't just," Robert began. "I can." Henry's voice dropped, a growl threading through the words. The beast beneath the man surfaced for a fleeting, terrifying second. "The question, Robert, is why a Silvermane alpha would need to sell his own daughter to a brute like Cale for peace. That speaks of a weakness I will investigate." That was a threat far beyond tonight. That was a death sentence for Robert's rule. Henry didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned, sweeping Peyton with him. Her legs, weak and trembling, couldn't keep up. In one fluid motion, he bent and lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. The world spun again, but this time it was from his scent, his strength, the impossible reality of it. "Hold on," he murmured, his voice a rough vibration against her ear. Then he moved. He wasn't running. He was a force of nature cutting a path through the stunned crowd. Pack members from both sides scrambled out of his way. She caught a glimpse of Delaney, her father's head enforcer and the closest thing she'd had to a friend. Her sharp-featured face a mask of shock, and something else was that relief. Then they were past the fire, into the dark tree line. The cold night air rushed past, and Henry's speed increased, becoming something preternatural. The trees blurred. The ground became a shadow beneath them. He was running faster than any human, faster than any wolf she'd ever seen, with a grace that spoke of immense, leashed power. Peyton buried her face in the wool of his coat, the world reducing to the sound of his steady heartbeat, the rush of wind, and the frantic, hammering rhythm of her own. What happened next changed everything. She didn't know how long the journey lasted. The tea, the shock, the overwhelming sensory overload pulled her down into a dizzying half-sleep. She was aware of transitions. The scent of pine giving way to stone and iron, the sounds of the forest replaced by the distant, echoing drip of water, and the low murmur of unfamiliar voices that fell silent as they passed. Finally, there was stillness. The gentle motion stopped. She was being laid down, not on cold earth, but on something impossibly soft. Furs. The air was warm, carrying the faint, clean scent of cedar and the same winter frost essence that was Henry. She forced her eyes open. She was in a chamber, but it was like no room she'd ever seen. It was carved from dark, gray stone, vast and high-ceilinged. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, a low fire crackling within. Tapestries depicting epic hunts and moonlit battles hung from the walls. The furniture was heavy, ancient, and elegant. This wasn't a lodge. This was a fortress. This was a throne room made private, the Alpha King's chambers. Henry stood by the bed, looking down at her, his expression unreadable. The storm in his eyes had banked to a simmering intensity. Peyton, he said her name, and it sounded like a key turning in a long-locked door. You know my name. Her voice was a dry rasp. I felt it, he said, as if that explained everything. He took a step closer. The pull between them surged, a physical ache in her center. The moment I crossed into that clearing, a pull, a scream from you. She pushed herself up on her elbows, the furs pooling around her waist. I didn't scream. Not out loud, he said. His gaze traveled over her face, her disheveled hair, the white shift. It wasn't lewd. It was assessing, possessive, and utterly confused. What were they giving you? A tea for the ritual. To open me to the moon. A dark frown etched his features. It's laced with wolfsbane and dreamroot, a submissive draft. They were drugging you for the handing over. His hands clenched at his sides. The air grew heavier. Robert. He will answer for that, among other things. The way he said it, the cold, final promise of retribution, should have frightened her. Robert was her father, her alpha, but all she felt was a hollow vindication. Then, the reality of her situation crashed down. Why am I here? She whispered. You dissolved the pact. You humiliated my father and Cale. You could have just sent me away. Why bring me here? Henry was silent for a long moment. The fire popped. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, a long, lonely sound that echoed through the stone. You truly don't know, do you? He finally asked, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't place. No, what? He moved then, so fast she flinched. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was overwhelming. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. The touch sent a jolt straight to her core. When I caught you, he said, his eyes holding hers prisoner, the world went quiet. The chaos, the politics, the endless weight of the crown, it just stopped. There was only you. And this. He placed his hand flat against his own chest, over his heart. This snarling inside me that I have spent a century learning to control. It took one look at you and broke its chains. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. My wolf recognized you before I did. It knows what you are. Peyton's blood ran cold, then hot. 1,000 childhood whispers rushed back. Her mother's early death. Robert's cold disdain. The way the pack wolves sometimes watched her with uneasy curiosity. The strange, fleeting strength she'd felt at times of high emotion, quickly buried. The dreams of running on 4 legs, of tasting the wind. What am I? The question was a breath. Before he could answer, a sharp knock echoed through the chamber door. Henry didn't move, his gaze still locked on hers. Enter. The door opened, and a woman walked in. She was stunning, with fiery red hair and a confident stride. Delaney, but not the Delaney she knew. This Delaney wore the dark leathers of the king's personal guard, a silver insignia of a crowned wolf on her shoulder. Her eyes, the same sharp green, found Peyton's and widened slightly. My king, Delaney said, her voice respectful but firm. Robert Silvermane is at the outer gate. He's demanding an audience. He says he's come for his daughter. Henry's expression turned to ice. He is to be detained. in the lower cells. Delaney didn't blink. On what charge? Treason against the crown, Henry said, the words final, and attempted trafficking of a royal mate. The word hung in the air like a struck gong. Mate. Peyton's heart stopped. Delaney's composure cracked for a full second, her eyes flying to Peyton with a mixture of astonishment and dawning understanding. Understood, Delaney said, recovering. She gave a short bow and turned to leave. Delaney, Peyton called out, the name a plea. Delaney paused at the door. Her gaze softened just for a moment. You're safe here, Peyton, safer than you've ever been. Then she was gone, the heavy door closing with a definitive thud that echoed like a tomb seal. Silence descended, thick and charged. Henry was still watching her, waiting for her reaction. Mate, Peyton choked out. That's a legend, a fairy tale for pups. It is our most fundamental truth, he said, standing up. He began to pace, a caged predator. And it is the one thing an alpha cannot command, cannot negotiate, and cannot deny. The moon chooses. The bond is absolute. He stopped, pinning her with his gaze. You are mine, and I am yours. The bond sparked the moment I touched you. It's why I felt your distress from miles away. It's why my wolf would tear apart anyone who tries to take you from me now, including your wretched father. The possessiveness in his words should have felt like another prison. But the part of her that had been ignored, suppressed, and sold for territory, that part sang. It preened. It wanted to reach for him. But I'm not like you, she argued, desperation rising. I've never shifted. I don't feel a wolf inside me. Don't you? He challenged, his voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous rumble. When you're angry, truly angry, or scared, or, he took a step closer, the air heating between them, when you feel something else entirely. She couldn't breathe, he was right. There was a pressure under her skin, a second heartbeat she'd spent her life ignoring. The tea, he continued. The wolfsbane in it doesn't just induce submission in wolves, it suppresses the shift. In a latent wolf, one who hasn't yet come into their power, it would act as a permanent cage. Robert wasn't just drugging you for the ritual. He was ensuring you'd never become a threat. He was keeping you human, keeping you weak. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her own father had been poisoning her. For years, the ceremonial cups of strengthening, tea before every pack gathering, the way he'd always insisted. Why? She whispered, her world fracturing. That, Henry said, his eyes glowing with a faint, amber light in the dim room, is the question, isn't it? What is Robert so terrified you might become? Before she could process it, a new sound cut through the silence. Not a knock, a howl, but this wasn't distant or lonely. It was close, rising from the courtyard below the chamber's narrow, high windows. It was a howl of challenge, of fury, and of gathering power. It was answered by a dozen others, a symphony of rising aggression. Henry's head snapped toward the window. His body went rigid, every muscle coiling. He wouldn't be that stupid, Henry growled, but the tension in the room spiked to a breaking point. Another howl, closer now, followed by the distinct, horrifying sound of bones beginning to crack and reshape. The scent of aggression and wild magic seeped under the door. Peyton scrambled back on the bed, the furs tangling around her legs. What's happening? Henry turned to her, his face a mask of ferocious protectiveness. Robert, he's not waiting for dawn, he's forcing a challenge, here, now. He strode to the door, then looked back at her, his stormy eyes blazing. Stay in this room. Do not open this door for anyone but me or Delaney. Do you understand? She could only nod, terror icing her veins. He gave her one last, searing look. The bond is awakening in you, Peyton. The moon is rising, and your father has just signed his own death warrant. He yanked the door open and was gone, the sound of his retreating footsteps swallowed by the rising cacophony of snarls and shifting forms from below. Peyton was alone in the Alpha King's chamber, the fire her only companion. She stared at the closed door, the howls and crashes of the beginning battle a nightmare soundtrack. But louder than all of it was the new, insistent pulse inside her, a low, building growl in her own blood, a pressure in her bones that felt less like breaking and more like remembering. She looked down at her own hands, trembling in her lap, and for the first time, she saw not the weak, traded daughter of a dishonorable alpha. She saw claws waiting to be born, the echo of my father's challenge, a formal, lethal declaration of war against the Alpha King himself, hung in the stone corridor like the aftershock of a thunderclap. If only I had known then that his pride would burn everything to the ground, starting with me. Henry didn't flinch. The hand on my back, which had been a steady, warm pressure, became iron. "Take her to the West Tower chambers," he commanded Delaney, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. "Post a full guard. No one enters but you or me." "Henry," I began, my own voice a frail thread. His gaze cut to me, the gold in his eyes blazing. "This changes nothing, Peyton. It only accelerates the timeline." He leaned down, his breath warm against my ear, his words for me alone. "My wolf knows yours. It is screaming at me to finish what was started at the ritual. But he will not touch you again. I swear it." Then he was gone, striding back down the corridor toward the source of the uproar, his enforcers falling into step behind him like shadows given form. The heavy door to the throne room boomed shut, muting the chaos. "Come on," Delaney said gently, her hand replacing Henry's on my arm. Her touch was firm but not possessive. "Let's get you somewhere you can breathe." She led me through a labyrinth of stone. The air grew cooler, smelling of old rock and faintly of night-blooming jasmine from some hidden courtyard. Our footsteps were the only sound, a rhythmic tap-tap on the flagstones that underscored the silence. I was trembling, a fine, constant shake I couldn't control. The cocktail of terror, the remnants of my father's suppressant drugs, and the raw, alien pull toward the male who had just claimed me ward in my bloodstream. "He's really going to fight him?" I finally whispered, the question too loud in the quiet hall. "Robert issued a formal alpha challenge on the steps of the king's fortress," Delaney said, her tone pragmatic. "By our oldest laws, it must be answered, and quickly. To delay is seen as weakness." She glanced at me. "Your father miscalculated. He thought the king would be bound by the treaty's politics. He didn't account for you. For a mate bond he felt from 100 miles away." The words sounded absurd. "For a fated bond," she corrected softly. We stopped before a heavy oak door banded with iron. She produced a key. "It's not just feeling, Peyton, it's a fundamental truth." His wolf recognized its other half. To deny it would be to deny his own nature. And an alpha king who denies his nature cannot rule. She pushed the door open. The room beyond was nothing like the cold fortress exterior. It was a spacious chamber with a vaulted ceiling, dominated by a large bed draped in dark fabrics. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, pushing back the stone's chill. Thick rugs covered the floor, and tall, narrow windows looked out over a moonlit landscape of jagged mountains. It was a room of power, but also of comfort. His room. "These are the king's private chambers," I stated, frozen on the threshold. "They are the most secure rooms in the fortress," Delaney replied, ushering me inside. "And currently the only place he knows you will be safe. Sit. You look like you're about to fall over." I sank into a plush chair by the fire, the heat immediately seeping into my cold skin. Delaney moved to a sideboard and poured water from a crystal pitcher. The clink of glass was a domestic sound that felt utterly foreign. "You work for him," I said, watching her. You were his spy in my father's pack. I am a member of the king's personal guard, she said, handing me the glass. My assignment to the Silvermane pack was a rotational duty and a strategic one. The king likes to know the state of his border alphas. Robert's instability had been noted. A bitter laugh escaped me. Instability. He sold his own daughter to his worst enemy for a slice of land. He tried, Delaney said, her eyes hardening. And in doing so, he committed treason. The trafficking of a latent royal mate is a capital offense. The challenge is his desperate play to regain authority, and if he wins, pardon himself. The water tasted clean and cold. I drank it all. What happens if Henry loses? Delaney didn't sugarcoat it. If the king falls, Robert becomes king. His first act would be to legitimize the treaty with Nightfang. You would be given to Kale. Immediately. A wave of nausea rolled through me. The firelight seemed to dim. The pull in my chest, the one that yearned toward the door Henry had left through, twisted into a sharp, protective pang. No, he won't lose, I heard myself say, the conviction in my own voice surprising me. Delaney gave me a long, assessing look. The bond is settling, you feel it, don't you? The need to ensure his safety. I looked away toward the windows and the indifferent moon. I feel confused. I feel like my entire life was a lie. I was told I was human, a defect, a bargaining chip. My fingers tightened on the glass. Now I'm told I'm a werewolf, and my wolf is apparently important enough to start a war over. I don't know what I feel. That's fair, Delaney said. She pulled a stool over and sat near me, her posture relaxed but alert. The suppressants would have muted everything. Your wolf, your emotions, your instincts. They're wearing off now, and the mate bond is hitting you like a tidal wave on top of it. It's a lot. A log shifted in the grate, sending up a shower of sparks. The sound was like a sigh. What happens to me now? I asked the core question. That depends on the king, she said. And on you. The bond must be sealed, Peyton, for both your sakes. An unsealed, faded bond in an alpha, especially one under threat, is a volatile thing. It's a vulnerability his enemies could exploit. And for you, she hesitated. An unawakened wolf tied to an alpha is like a lit fuse. Your body, your mind, they will push you toward completion. It will become a physical need. A flush heated my skin that had nothing to do with the fire. The memory of Henry's scent, his touch, the possessive rumble in his chest, flooded back with startling clarity. It was a need, a hollow, aching thing beginning to form deep inside me. I shoved the feeling down. And if I don't want it? The rebellion was weak, but I had to voice it. I didn't ask for this, any of it. Delaney's expression held a deep pity. The bond doesn't ask, it simply is. You can fight it. You can make it a misery for both of you. Or, she leaned forward, you can see it for what it is. The only reason you're not currently Kale Nightfang's bride. The king didn't just want you, Peyton. He claimed you. There's a difference. One is desire. The other is a vow. Before I could process that, a distant, haunting sound cut through the night, a long, deep howl that rose from the fortress walls below. It was answered by another, and another, a chorus of powerful voices. It wasn't a mournful sound. It was a declaration, a mustering. The king's pack gathers, Delaney said, rising swiftly and moving to the window. The challenge will be met at dawn. Dawn, a few hours. My heart hammered against my ribs. The new, fragile thing inside me. The bond, my wolf, I didn't know clawed in panic. Danger. He is in danger. The door opened without a knock. Henry stood there, backlit by the torches in the hall. He had shed his formal jacket. His white shirt was rolled at the sleeves, revealing corded forearms. He smelled of cold night air, stone, and a sharp metallic scent I realized was the anticipation of battle. "Leave us, Delaney," he said, his eyes locked on me. "Sire!" She bowed her head and slipped out, closing the door with a soft but definitive thud. We were alone. He didn't move from the doorway for a long moment, just watched me as I sat frozen by the fire. The atmosphere in the room thickened, charged with the unspoken words and the primal call still echoing outside. "You heard the howls," he stated. I nodded, unable to speak. "Your father has gathered what remains of his loyalists at the tree line. 50 warriors. He's outnumbered 3-1, but he has the desperation of a cornered animal." Henry finally moved, walking into the room with a predator's silent grace. He stopped a few feet from my chair. "He will fight dirty. He will use any weakness." I looked up at him. In the flickering firelight, he looked like a statue of some ancient war god, all hard lines and devastating purpose. "Are you weak?" I whispered. A faint, ruthless smile touched his lips. "I have a new vulnerability, one I never anticipated." His gaze burned into me. "You—" I stood up, a sudden surge of frustration giving me motion. "Then let me go. If I'm a liability, just send me away. Nullify whatever this is." The words were a lie, and we both knew it. The mere thought of leaving caused a physical pain in my chest. He was in front of me in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup my face. The contact was electric, a jolt that silenced my protest and stole my breath. His thumbs stroked my cheekbones. "It doesn't work that way, little wolf. You are mine. From the moment you fell into my arms, it was decided. By fate, by law, and," his voice dropped to a growl, "by my own will. I do not relinquish what is mine." His touch was undoing me. The fear, the confusion, the exhaustion, they all melted under the heat of his palms, replaced by that insistent, hungry pull. My body leaned into his of its own volition. A low sound, almost a whimper, escaped my throat. Henry's eyes darkened. "Do you feel it? The tie between us, it's a living thing, and it's afraid for me right now. I can taste your fear in the back of my throat." "I don't want you to die," I breathed, the admission torn from me. "I have no intention of dying," he said, his forehead lowering to touch mine. The gesture was shockingly intimate. "But a challenge is to the death. There are no other terms. When I face him at dawn, I will kill your father, Peyton. Do you understand that?" The words were a bucket of ice water. I stiffened. The man he would kill was a monster, a traitor, a seller of daughters. But he was also the only father I had ever known. A twisted, broken part of me still longed for a version of him that never existed. The conflict must have shown on my face. Henry's expression softened, just a fraction. "He forfeited the right to be your parent when he drugged you and sold you. He is now only my enemy, but I tell you this not to be cruel. I tell you so there is no illusion between us. No false hope. He was giving me the truth, harsh and unvarnished. In a life built on lies, it was a terrible, precious gift." "Why are you here?" I asked. "Shouldn't you be preparing?" "This is preparation," he murmured, his lips brushing my temple. The sensation sent shivers down my spine. "My wolf is unsettled, agitated. It senses the threat to its mate. It needs reassurance. Your scent, your touch, it grounds me. It makes the rage focused, cold, instead of wild and hot." He was using me. The thought should have angered me. Instead, that new part of me preened at being needed, at being essential to his control. I lifted a hand, tentatively, and placed it flat against his chest, over the steady, strong beat of his heart. The muscle beneath my palm was rock hard. Under my touch, his heartbeat sped up. A deep, approving rumble vibrated from his chest into my hand. "Yes," he whispered. We stood like that for a long time, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. The world narrowed to the space between our bodies, to the points of contact. The howling had ceased. The only sounds were the crackling fire and our shared breaths. What happened next changed everything. A sharp, urgent knock shattered the quiet. Henry's head lifted, his body going taut. "Enter," he barked. Delaney opened the door, her face grim. "Sire, a scout has returned." The situation has evolved. Henry released me, turning his full attention to her. The loss of his touch felt like a physical wound. "Report." "It's not just Silvermane," Delaney said, her words rapid. Cale Nightfang did not retreat. He circled back. His warriors have joined Robert's forces at the tree line. They've formed a coalition. The challenge is no longer a single alpha dispute. It's become a rebellion. The air in the room turned to ice. Henry's power surged, a palpable wave of dominance that made the fire sputter. My own breath caught. A rebellion, 2 alphas against the king. The odds had just shifted catastrophically. Henry's jaw clenched. Cale sees an opportunity. If Robert weakens me, Cale can finish me and claim both the crown and his prize. His gaze sliced back to me, glowing with ferocious intensity. "He still wants you. This is now a war fought for 2 reasons, my throne and my mate." The vulnerability he spoke of was now a gaping chasm. I was the catalyst, the prize, the weakness. "What do we do?" My voice was small. Henry's expression transformed into one of terrifying, absolute resolve. The warmth he'd shown me was gone, replaced by the unyielding face of the Alpha King. "We adapt. The challenge ground at dawn is a trap. I will not walk into it." He looked at Delaney. "Muster the entire garrison, fortify the outer walls, we defend the fortress. Let them break themselves against the stone." "A siege," Delaney said, nodding. "It's the smart play. We have the supplies, they don't." "Go," Henry commanded. As Delaney left, Henry turned back to me. He grasped my shoulders, his grip firm. "Listen to me. You will stay in this chamber. Delaney will guard you. No matter what you hear, howls, screams, the sound of battle, you do not leave this room. Do you understand?" I nodded numb. "The bond will try to drive you to me if I'm injured," he continued, his voice urgent. "You must fight it. Your safety is paramount. If this fortress falls—" He stopped, the unthinkable hanging between us. He pulled me close in a swift, crushing embrace, his mouth against my hair. "It will not fall," he growled, as much to himself as to me. He released me and strode toward the door. "Henry," I called out, desperation clawing at my throat. He paused, looking back. The words tumbled out raw and true. "Win." For the first time since the throne room, a real, fierce smile touched his lips. It was a promise and a threat all in one. Then he was gone, the door closing with a sound of finality. I was alone. The silence was immense, broken only by the pop of the fire. I wrapped my arms around myself, the ghost of his embrace still lingering. Beyond the thick stone walls, I heard new sounds, the shouts of commanders, the clatter of weapons being distributed, the heavy thud of gates being secured. Clang, thud, boom. The sounds of a fortress preparing for war. I moved to the window, pressing my hands against the cold glass. In the distance, at the dark edge of the forest, I could see the flicker of many torches, a swarm of fireflies that was the combined army of Silvermane and Nightfang. My father and my would-be husband, united to destroy the king who had taken me. The hollow ache inside me yawned wider, a chasm of fear and a terrifying, dawning possessiveness. "Mine," the feeling whispered. "He is mine." A sudden, sharp pain lanced through my skull, behind my eyes. I gasped, stumbling back from the window. The room swam. Visions, sharp and disjointed, flashed behind my eyelids, not my own memories. The view from a running wolf. The scent of pine and enemy. The cold focus of the hunt. I collapsed to my knees on the rug, clutching my head. It was his sight. His senses. The bond was deepening, sinking us. And through the blur of shared sensation, one clear, grim realization from Henry pierced through to me. They weren't waiting for dawn. The thunderous blast of the fortress's main gates being struck by a battering ram shook the very stones beneath my knees. The siege had begun. The thunderous crack of ancient oak splintering echoed through the stone, a vibration Peyton felt in her teeth. The gates, they were here. The psychic flash, Henry's view of the tree line, the surge of enemy wolves, had vanished, leaving behind a metallic taste of fear and a pounding heart that wasn't entirely her own. Mine, the thought was a primal snarl in her mind, no longer a question. It was a fact as fundamental as breathing. Henry was in danger. Chaos erupted beyond the chamber door. Shouts, running boots, the distant clang of steel. Peyton scrambled from the bed, her body humming with an alien energy. The lingering fog of the suppression drugs was gone, burned away by the mate bond's fierce ignition. She could hear the individual footfalls of guards 3 corridors away, could smell the cold stone, the hint of oil from the torches, and beneath it all, the coppery scent of impending bloodshed. The door flew open. Delaney stood there, clad not in Silvermane leathers but in the darker, plated armor of the King's Guard. Her face was a mask of grim focus. "With me, now, the King's orders." "Henry," Peyton started. "Is on the wall where a king should be," Delaney cut in, striding forward and gripping Peyton's arm. Her touch was firm, not cruel. "Your presence here is a vulnerability he cannot afford. The West Tower is compromised if the outer yard falls. We're moving to the inner keep. He's fighting them, Robert and Cale together." The words felt stupid, obvious, but Peyton needed to hear it. "It's not a duel anymore. It's a war," Delaney said, pulling her into the corridor. The sounds magnified, roars of wolves, both beast and man, the terrifying thwump of arrows finding their marks. Robert's challenge was a ruse to buy time for Cale to mobilize. They have a battering ram and siege ladders. This is a coup. They moved at a swift jog through labyrinthine passages. Peyton's senses, now painfully acute, were overwhelmed. The fierce sweat of servants huddled in alcoves, the rage of warriors rushing past, the tang of her own terror. And through it all, a thin, silver thread of connection that pulled taut toward the front of the fortress. "Henry, what happens if they break through?" Peyton asked, her voice barely a whisper against the din. Delaney's jaw tightened. She didn't answer for 3 turns. Then, quietly, "If the king falls, the fortress falls. The laws of challenge become irrelevant in a rebellion. Cale would claim you as spoils of war. Robert would likely kill you for the humiliation you've caused him." She glanced at Peyton. "The bond is deepening, isn't it? You can feel him." Peyton could only nod. It was like having a second heartbeat in her chest, a frantic, powerful rhythm that was currently a storm of lethal focus and controlled fury. "Use it," Delaney urged as they descended a narrow spiral staircase into a colder, older part of the fortress. "Don't fight it. The bond can be a tether. It can steady you. But you must stay here in your mind. If you get lost in his, you'll be no use to anyone." They burst into a vast, circular armory, now a chaotic command post. The air was thick with the smell of oiled metal and sweat. And there, in the center, issuing orders in a voice that cut through the bedlam, was Henry. He was a vision of terrifying majesty. Clad in dark, rune-etched armor, his crown replaced by a simple steel circlet, he was the epicenter of the storm. His eyes, glowing that fierce amber, swept over a map table, then snapped up as they entered. The connection between them jolted, a live wire. Peyton gasped, a flush of heat and a dizzying sense of rightness washing over her. His gaze held hers for a fractured second, and in it she saw not just the Alpha King, but the man who had breathed her name like a vow. "Sire, she is secured," Delaney reported, releasing Peyton's arm. Henry gave a sharp nod. "The East Sally port is holding. Their ram is the priority. Delaney, take a squad of your choosing. Use the postern gate in the lower crypts, flank them, and burn it. Understood. Delaney was already turning, barking names. Henry's attention returned to Peyton. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, the warriors around them giving them a wide berth. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical force. You feel it all, he stated, his voice low for her alone. Yes, the fear, the anger. Yes, and your certainty. It was true. Beneath the strategic fury, Henry's core was an unshakable pillar of resolve. He did not believe he would lose. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good. That certainty is for you. This fortress has never fallen. It will not fall today. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated in her bones. But if the thread snaps, if you feel it break, Delaney knows a route out. You run. You do not look back. Swear it to me. The command, the sheer possibility of that thread breaking, sent a bolt of pure agony through her. It wasn't emotional. It was visceral, as if he'd threatened to carve out a part of her own soul. Her hand flew to her chest. Don't say that. Swear it, Peyton. His amber eyes bored into hers, leaving no room for argument. I swear, she breathed, the words tasting like ash. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. But as he turned back to the map, a massive explosion rocked the very foundations of the keep. Dust rained from the ceiling. A runner, face smeared with soot, skidded into the room. The main gate is breached. There in the outer yard, the reaction was instantaneous. Henry's control solidified into something glacial and deadly. Seal the inner gatehouse, archers to the battlements, all non-combatants to the Great Hall. His gaze found Peyton again. You go to the high observatory. You will see, but you will be safe. Go, now. A young guard she didn't know was at her side, guiding her toward another staircase. She looked back once. Henry was already donning his helmet, his form shifting from a man of command into a warlord of legend. The thread between them stretched, thrumming with the promise of violence. What happened next was a blur of stone steps and rising noise. The observatory was a rounded room at the highest point of the inner keep, with narrow windows overlooking the carnage below. Peyton rushed to one, her stomach lurching. The sprawling outer courtyard was a nightmare of clashing bodies. Wolves the size of horses, coats of silver and midnight black, tore into the king's gray-clad defenders. Men fought with sword and claw. She saw Robert then in his hybrid form, a massive, silver-furred beast with her father's cruel eyes, leading a charge against a barricade. He moved with a ferocity she'd never seen, a monster unleashed. And Cale, a hulking shadow of a wolf, was flanking him, driving toward the inner gatehouse. They fought in tandem, a lethal partnership forged in shared hatred. But the king's forces were disciplined, holding the choke points. And then she saw him. Henry moved through the fray not as a beast, but as a man in armor, yet he was the most terrifying thing on the field. His sword was a blur of silver light, each stroke precise and final. He was a dam, holding back the flood of rebels almost single-handedly at the breach point. Peyton's every instinct screamed to be down there. The bond was a raging torrent now, feeding her his hyper-awareness. The calculation of every parry, the shift of every enemy's weight, the burn in his muscles. She was both spectator and participant, trapped in this tower. A new sound rose above the clash, the roar of fire. From a small, hidden gate on the far side of the yard, a torrent of flaming arrows shot into the mass of the enemy. The bulky shape of the battering ram, now deep in the yard, erupted into flames. Delaney's squad had succeeded. The rebel advance stuttered, thrown into disarray by the fire at their rear. Henry seized the moment, his voice a thunderous roar that carried even to her height. "For the crown!" His guard rallied with an answering shout, pushing forward. For a glorious, heart-soaring moment, Peyton thought they would win. She saw Robert thrown back, saw Cale falter. If only I had known that Robert's greatest treachery was not outside the walls, but within. A movement to her left. The young guard who had escorted her was not watching the battle. He was staring at her, his expression strange, vacant. His hand was on the hilt of his dagger. "The view is quite something, isn't it, daughter?" A familiar, venomous voice said from the doorway. Peyton whirled. Jonathan, the Silvermane Beta, stood there. He was bloodied, but not from the battle in the yard. The bodies of 2 king's guards lay behind him in the stairwell. He held a bloody short sword loosely at his side. The young guard beside her drew his dagger, his allegiance revealed. "Jonathan," Peyton breathed, cold dread dousing the fiery connection to Henry. This was the consequence of Henry's focus on the external threat. The reaction to the siege had left the heart of his keep vulnerable. "Your father sends his regards," Jonathan said, stepping into the room. His eyes, always so calculating, held a glint of triumph. He knew the king would stash you up high, like a treasure in a tower. He just needed the distraction to be compelling enough. "He'll kill you for this," Peyton said, backing away until her spine hit the cold stone wall. The thread to Henry was screaming with alarm, but it was distant, fractured by her own immediate, consuming terror. "Henry is fighting for his life downstairs. He is otherwise occupied," Jonathan sneered. "The plan was always to take you back. The challenge, the siege, it was all to get you. You are the key. With you in hand, Henry's bond will make him reckless. He'll walk into any trap to retrieve his mate. And then the king dies, the packs are divided, and your father and Cale rule the pieces." He gestured with his sword. "Now come quietly. Or don't. I have orders to bring you alive." He didn't specify in what condition. The young guard advanced. Peyton's mind raced, empty. She was no warrior. The latent wolf inside her stirred, a panicked, caged thing, all instinct and no skill. But the mate bond was not just fear and connection. In that moment of absolute peril, it was also a conduit. A surge of raw, predatory instinct, not her own, flooded her system. It was Henry's essence, his wolf's knowledge, bleeding through the tether in her moment of need. Her vision sharpened, the guard's advance slowing to a crawl. She could see the minute tension in his shoulder before he lunged. She didn't think. She reacted. Ducking under the clumsy stab of the dagger, she drove her own shoulder into his chest, sending him stumbling back with a force that surprised them both. A guttural sound, almost a growl, ripped from her throat. Jonathan's eyes widened slightly. "So the wolf is finally waking up. How inconvenient." He raised his sword, done with games. "Subdue her." The guard regained his footing, anger darkening his features. He came at her again, this time with purpose. Peyton dodged the first swipe, but the backhand caught her across the temple. Stars exploded behind her eyes. She fell to her knees, the world tilting. Through the ringing in her ears, she felt a seismic shift in the bond. Henry's focused fury shattered into pure, unadulterated rage. A psychic scream of her name echoed in her skull, followed by a wave of such destructive intent it stole her breath. Down in the yard, Henry, in the midst of cutting down a Night-Fang warrior, suddenly froze. His head snapped up, looking directly at the high observatory tower. He knew. Abandoning his position, ignoring the battle raging around him, he began cutting a brutal, direct path toward the inner keep. He was coming for her. Jonathan saw her dazed look, her hand pressed to her throbbing temple. He smiled. Right on schedule, the king takes the bait. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her to her feet. "Let's go, we need to be in position." He began dragging her toward the stairwell. Peyton fought, clawing at his hand, but he was too strong. The guard followed, blocking her kicks. As they descended into the dark, smoky stairwell, the sounds of the main battle grew muffled, replaced by the ominous silence of the fortress's interior. They moved down to a lower level, into a network of servant passages. Jonathan's plan was clear. Extract her through the chaos while Henry was drawn inward, leaving his defenses leaderless. He shoved her into a small, windowless antechamber used for storing linens. "Wait here. The exit is nearby, but I need to clear the path." He locked the door from the outside with a heavy click, leaving her with the young guard who watched her with nervous eyes, his dagger still drawn. Peyton slumped against a shelf, her head pounding. The bond was a chaos of conflicting signals, Henry's frantic, approaching rage, her own despair, and a new, terrifying sensation creeping in from the edges. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the stones of the floor. It was deep, ancient, and throbbed with immense power. The guard felt it too, looking down in confusion. Then the air in the room grew thick and heavy. The torchlight flickered, not from wind, but from a sudden pressure change. Peyton's latent wolf, stirred by the bond and the danger, now recoiled in primal, soul-deep terror. This was not the energy of wolves. This was something older. Something wrong. The guard's eyes shot to the far wall. "What is that?" he whispered. The stone itself seemed to be darkening, as if absorbing the light. A seam in the masonry, previously invisible, began to glow with a faint, sickly green light. The hum intensified, becoming a discernible, whispering chant in a language that scraped against Peyton's mind. A secret door, hidden by magic older than the fortress, was slowly grinding open. From the impenetrable darkness beyond, a figure emerged. Tall, shrouded in robes that seemed woven from shadow, it moved with an unnatural grace. The guard cried out, raising his dagger, but a tendril of that same green light lashed out from the figure's hand, wrapping around his throat. He gagged, his eyes bulging, then collapsed, lifeless, to the floor. The figure turned. Within the depths of its hood, 2 points of cold, green fire fixed on Peyton. A voice, dry as forgotten bones and smooth as poisoned silk, echoed in the silent room. "Peyton Silvermane, the catalyst, we have been waiting for you." The figure extended a pale, long-fingered hand. The lock on the door behind her melted into slag with a hiss. "Come," the voice whispered. "Your father's rebellion is a trifling distraction. Your true purpose lies with us." Paralyzed, Peyton realized the horrifying truth. Robert and Cale were not the masterminds. They were pawns. And she was not just a prize to be won in a war of wolves. She was the key to something far, far darker. And it had just unlocked its door. The scent of ozone and old stone filled the narrow room. The mysterious figure's voice, a dry rustle of ancient parchment, still hung in the air. The catalyst is awake. Peyton's heart was a trapped bird against her ribs. Jonathan's grip on her arm was iron, his own shock a palpable vibration in the air. The young traitor guard lay dead at their feet, his neck twisted at an impossible angle, killed by a gesture. "What are you?" Jonathan snarled, shifting his body to shield Peyton partially, not out of care, but to protect his bait. His eyes, wide with a fear he couldn't quite mask, scanned the entity. It, for Peyton, could not assign it a gender, tilted its head. The hood shadowed its face, but she felt the weight of its attention settle on her, a physical pressure. "A custodian of older laws," it whispered. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves. "The girl is a thread in a tapestry you cannot see, little wolf. Your rebellion is a trifling distraction. She belongs to a deeper game." A roar, distant but bone-shaking, echoed down through the stone. Henry. The mate bond, a wire pulled taut to breaking, sang with his fury and his terror. He was coming. He was tearing through his own fortress to reach her. The sound was a catalyst of its own. Thump, thump, thump. The pounding of heavy footfalls on the main stairs, still floors away but closing fast. Henry's rage was a storm front, and it was almost here. Jonathan's calculation was visible in the tightening of his jaw. The plan was collapsing. He had the prize, but the board had changed. A new, unknown player had appeared, and the king was moments away. He made his choice. With a brutal yank, he pulled Peyton back toward the main servant corridor, away from the hidden passage and the entity. "We're leaving. Now," he growled. The figure did not move to stop them. It simply watched. "Run, little wolves," it murmured, a hint of amusement in its hollow tone. "The pieces are in motion. We will collect our threads soon enough." Then, as Jonathan dragged Peyton into the dim corridor, she glanced back. The hidden door in the stone was sealing itself, the seams of light vanishing as if they had never been. The dead guard was the only evidence any of it had happened. What happened next changed everything. Jonathan moved with desperate, predatory speed. He didn't head for the main stairs where Henry's thunderous approach echoed. Instead, he veered down a narrower, colder stairwell, one that smelled of damp and disuse. Peyton stumbled, her bare feet scraping on rough stone. "He's coming for you," she gasped, the bond a live wire of shared panic and fury. "He'll kill you." "That's the point," Jonathan panted, his voice grim. "He'll follow. He'll leave the wall, and Robert will be waiting." The cold logic of it sliced through her panic. She wasn't just bait, she was a lever to pull the king from his defenses. The realization ignited something hot and feral in her chest. Mine. The thought was no longer a confused whisper, but a clarion call. "You will not use me to hurt him." A new scent flooded her senses: moss, wet earth, open air. They burst out of a low postern gate, hidden by a cascade of thorny briars. They were on the opposite side of the fortress from the main battle. The forest loomed, a dark wall 30 yards away across a killing ground of cleared earth. "Now we run," Jonathan said, his eyes glowing faintly with his wolf. "And you will run, girl, or I will drag you." He released her arm, shoving her forward. The instinct to bolt was overwhelming, but another instinct, older and deeper, rose. Her latent wolf, stirred by terror, by the bond, by the raw need to survive, uncoiled. The world sharpened. The individual leaves on the distant trees became clear. The scent of pine sap, of fox, of the cold night air separated into distinct strands. And she heard it, the rhythm of Jonathan's breathing, the shift of his weight as he prepared to chase her. She didn't run toward the trees. She dropped. Spinning on the ball of her foot, she drove her elbow backward with all her weight, aiming for the solar plexus she could sense was exposed. It was a move she'd never learned, a knowledge that flowed from the bond, from Henry's lifetime of combat. Action, thud. The impact jarred her arm, but it connected. Jonathan grunted, the air leaving him in a surprised whoosh. Reaction. He backhanded her. The world exploded in white light. She hit the ground, the taste of copper filling her mouth. But she rolled, scrambling to her feet. Her vision swam, but her other senses held the world steady. She could hear his growl, see the heat signature of his body through her blurred sight. "Foolish little bitch," he spat, advancing. "You think a parlor trick saves you?" Consequence. A roar, closer than ever, tore through the night. Not from the fortress gate, but from above. Henry had not taken the stairs. He had gone through the fortress. A shadow, massive and furious, fell from a high battlement, landing between Peyton and Jonathan with an impact that shook the ground. The Alpha King stood in half form, a nightmare of muscle and claw and wrath. His clothes were torn, his armor dented and bloody from the battle he had abandoned. His eyes were pure, molten gold, fixed on Jonathan. "You," Henry breathed, the word a promise of annihilation. Jonathan froze, his bravado crumbling in the face of the king's unleashed power. He took a step back toward the forest. "The challenge is made, my king," he said, voice strained. "Robert waits for you on the field. This is just ensuring you attend." Henry didn't even look at him. His gaze found Peyton, bleeding and shaking on the ground. The fury in his eyes didn't diminish, but it was joined by a fracture of something desperate. The bond between them swelled. A torrent of relief, rage, and a terrifying, possessive love. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, barely human. She shook her head, unable to speak. "He's here." The moment of distraction was all Jonathan needed. He shifted, his bones cracking, fur erupting. In the form of a large, gray wolf, he bolted for the tree line. Henry moved. It was a blur. One second he was before Peyton, the next he had intercepted Jonathan's path. There was no elegant fight, no exchange of blows. Henry's clawed hand shot out, closed around the gray wolf's throat, and slammed him into the trunk of an ancient oak. The crack of wood and bone was sickening. Jonathan whimpered, shifting back to human form, dangling in Henry's grip. "You touched what is mine," Henry said, his voice low and deadly calm. "You stole her. For that there is no challenge, only execution. Robert," Jonathan choked out, "the Alliance Kale, are a nuisance I will swat aside after I burn your pack lands to ash," Henry finished. His fingers tightened. "Henry, wait!" Peyton's voice, raw but clear, stopped him. He didn't release Jonathan, but he turned his head, a question in his golden eyes. "Though the entity," she managed, pushing herself up. Her face throbbed. "In the servant room, it killed the guard. It said the rebellion was a distraction. It said I was a catalyst. It's coming for me." Henry's expression shifted. The pure rage cooled, hardened into something more dangerous, calculation. He looked from Peyton's terrified face to Jonathan's purpling one. The information changed the battlefield. A horn blast sounded from the main walls. The king's guard, signaling the enemy, was rallying. Robert and Kale, realizing the king had left the battle, were pressing the advance. Henry made a decision. He didn't kill Jonathan. Instead, he leaned close, his words for the beta alone. "You will carry a message to your alpha. Tell him his daughter is under the protection of the crown. Tell him an older enemy stirs. And tell him," Henry's voice dropped to a whisper that Peyton's enhanced hearing still caught. "Tell him if he values the survival of his bloodline at all, he will stand with me now, or everything he knows will be erased." He threw Jonathan toward the forest. The beta landed in a heap, gasping, before scrambling on all fours into the darkness. Henry turned to Peyton. The half-form receded, the claws retracting, though the gold still burned in his eyes. He crossed the distance and knelt before her, his large hands coming up to frame her face with a shocking tenderness. He brushed his thumb over her split lip, his own pain flashing across his features through the bond. "I felt your fear," he said, his voice ragged. "It was like a knife in my soul. I had to." "I know," she whispered, leaning into his touch. The bond hummed, a soothing balm over her raw nerves. The word mine echoed between them, understood now by both. The sounds of battle crescendoed from the front of the fortress. Shouts, howls, the clash of steel. Henry's head snapped toward the noise, his body tensing. He was a king, and his fortress was under attack. "I have to go back," he said, the conflict tearing at him. "But I will not leave you unguarded. Not again." He let out a short, sharp whistle. From the shadows of the postern gate, a figure emerged. Delaney. Her armor was spattered with blood, but she moved with purpose. She had followed her king. "My lord," she said, her eyes taking in Peyton's condition with a flash of anger. "Take her to the West Tower, the inner chamber, bar the door, guard her with your life," Henry commanded. "Trust no one. Something else is inside these walls. Something old and not of our kind." Delaney nodded, her face grim. "Understood." Henry stood, pulling Peyton up with him. He held her for a moment, his forehead resting against hers. The world, with its war and its ancient threats, narrowed to this point of contact. The bond it will hold. You are safe. You are mine. He said it as a fact, a law of nature. Then he was gone, a streak of motion heading back toward the heart of the fight. Delaney approached, offering a steadying arm. "Can you walk, Peyton?" Peyton nodded, her legs trembling but functional. As they moved back into the cold stone belly of the fortress, the reality settled upon her. Her father was outside, trying to kill her mate. A mysterious magical power considered her a catalyst. And the man, the wolf, who claimed her, was now fighting a war on two fronts because of her. If only I had known the ritual of the claimed moon was just the first stitch in a much darker tapestry. They climbed endless stairs, moving away from the battle sounds into a more silent, opulent part of the fortress. Delaney was vigilant, her hand on her sword hilt, checking every corner. "The entity," Peyton whispered, the silence pressing in. "It came from a door in the wall. The stone just opened." Delaney's jaw tightened. "The fortress is ancient, built on older ruins. There are passages even the King's Guard does not know. Legends say it was once a haven for beings of power, before the wolves came." They reached a heavy oaken door banded with iron. Delaney produced a key, unlocked it, and ushered Peyton into a spacious, circular chamber. A large bed dominated the room, and a fire crackled in a hearth, chasing away the chill. This was undeniably Henry's private space. His scent, pine, snow, and power was everywhere. "Bar the door," Delaney instructed, helping Peyton to sit by the fire. She dragged a heavy trunk in front of the entrance. "And do not open it for anyone but me or the king. His command is absolute." Peyton stared at the dancing flames, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving her cold and hollow. "He's out there because of me." "He's out there because it is his duty," Delaney corrected softly, but not unkindly. "And because you are his heart. A king without a heart fights only for power. A king with a heart fights for something worthier." She paused, listening to the distant, muffled sounds of combat. "Rest, I will keep watch." But rest was impossible. The bond was a live thing, a window into the chaos beyond. She could feel Henry's focused fury, his strategic mind assessing the battlefield, his raw power as he re-engaged the enemy. She flinched as she felt a slice of pain across his shoulder, not serious, but a shock through their connection. And then she felt something else, a coldness, a presence that was an absence on the sensory field of the bond. It was familiar. It was the scent of ozone and old stone. Her head jerked up. Delaney was at the window, peering through a narrow slit at the battle below. "Delaney," Peyton whispered. The fire in the hearth didn't flicker, but the shadow it cast on the far wall, it moved independently. It stretched, elongating, peeling itself away from the stone like rising smoke. "Delaney!" Peyton cried, scrambling back from the hearth. The guard turned. Her eyes widened as she saw the coalescing darkness in the center of the room. It took shape, the familiar hooded robe, the featureless void beneath the cowl. The entity had not needed a door. It was already here. "The thread is not to be kept in a tower," the figure whispered, its voice sucking the warmth from the air. "The catalyst must be primed." Delaney drew her sword, placing herself between the entity and Peyton. "By order of the Alpha King, stand down." The entity extended a hand, not toward Delaney, but toward the barred door. The iron bands glowed red-hot for an instant, then cooled. The lock clicked. "The king is occupied," it said, "and his heart is a vulnerability. Come, child of moon and hidden blood, your true inheritance awaits." The door swung open, and standing in the threshold, his eyes wild with triumph and a strange, magical gleam, was Robert Silvermane. He held a bloody axe. Behind him, the corridor was littered with the bodies of King's guards. He smiled, a cruel, broken thing. "Hello, daughter, time to come home." The entity stood beside him, a silent partner in the betrayal. The siege, the challenge, the rebellion, it had all been a feint. The real target had always been here, in the heart of the king's chambers. If only I had known my father hadn't come to challenge the king. He had come to collect me for something far, far worse. The shadow in the corner moved. It wasn't a trick of the firelight. It peeled itself from the stone, solidifying into the tall, robed figure from the linen's room. Delaney's snarl died in her throat, choked off by a wave of pressure that made the air too thick to breathe. Peyton's own gasp was silent, her body locking in primal terror. He was here, inside the sealed room. "Right on time, Robert," the entity said, its voice a dry rustle of parchment and grave soil. It gestured with a long-fingered hand, and the heavy oak door to the chamber unbolted itself with a series of deafening clacks. The door slammed inward. Robert Silvermane stood in the ruined frame, splattered in blood that was not his own. His chest heaved, his claws were extended and dripping, and his eyes, glowing with feral triumph, fixed instantly on Peyton. The scent of iron and death rolled off him in a wave. Behind him, the corridor was a silent, crimson charnel house. "Father," Peyton whispered, the word a broken thing. The residual little girl hope that had lingered in some deep, foolish part of her soul shriveled and died. This was no father. This was a monster who had sold her and now had slaughtered his way to her. "You see, daughter," Robert panted, stepping over the threshold. The magical pressure didn't seem to affect him. He had an ally here. "You belong to Silvermane, to me. All this," he waved a bloody claw at the opulent chamber. "A pretty cage. I'm here to collect what's mine." Delaney shifted, putting herself squarely between Robert and Peyton. "You will not touch her, traitor." Her voice was a low, deadly growl, but Peyton saw the tremor in her armed stance. She was one guard against an alpha and an unknown power. The entity chuckled, a sound like settling bones. "The loyal hound, how quaint, but this transaction is beyond your jurisdiction, pup." It didn't even look at Delaney. Its hooded face remained tilted toward Peyton. "The catalyst must be claimed. The older laws demand it." Catalyst, older laws. The terms meant nothing, yet they chilled her to the marrow. Henry's warning to Jonathan echoed in her mind. "Tell him an older enemy moves in the shadows." This was it. Not a rival pack. Something else entirely. "What do you want with me?" Peyton demanded, forcing her voice not to shake. The bond in her chest was a frantic, beating drum, a scream of alarm and rage that was not her own. "Henry, he knows, he feels this. Your inheritance, child," the entity hissed, gliding forward. The firelight seemed to avoid it, casting no shadow. "Dormant in your blood, suppressed by your father's poisons. The Silvermane line was never just wolves. You carry a key to a door that should remain shut. Your mate," it spat the word, "would let it rust. We would use it." Robert's grin was a gash of white in his bloody face. "You think the king wants you. He wants the peace your power could unmake. I want the power it will make. With you, we won't just rule a pack. We will rule the very fabric of this world." The revelation hit Peyton like a physical blow. Her whole life, her weakness, her isolation, it wasn't an absence. It was a suppression. Her father hadn't just drugged her to make her pliant for a treaty. He'd been caging something inside her, something he now wanted to unleash. Delaney lunged. It was a blur of motion, a dagger drawn from her boot aimed for the entity's back. She never made it. The entity didn't turn. It simply flicked its wrist. Delaney froze in midair, a choked gasp escaping her, then was flung sideways as if by a giant, invisible hand. She crashed into the stone wall with a sickening crunch and slid down, unmoving. "Delaney!" Peyton screamed, surging forward. Robert was on her in an instant. His hand, still clawed, clamped over her arm, his grip iron. The contact sent a bolt of revulsion through her, so strong it momentarily overshadowed her fear. "No more theatrics," he snarled. "We're leaving. Your king is busy dying on my walls." No, the thought was pure, instinctive. Mine. He is mine. The bond didn't just pulse now, it erupted. A wave of heat, of desperate, possessive fury flooded her veins. It was followed by a sudden, shocking clarity, a tactical map of the room, an instinctual knowledge of leverage, pressure points, and weakness. Henry's knowledge, flowing through the bond. Peyton didn't think. She reacted. She dropped her weight, twisting her body not against Robert's strength, but with it, using his own forward momentum. She brought her free hand up in a sharp, precise jab, not to his face, but to the nerve cluster at the junction of his neck and shoulder, a move she'd never learned. Robert grunted in surprise, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. She tore her arm free, scrambling backward toward the hearth, toward the heavy iron fire poker. "Interesting," the entity murmured, sounding amused. "The bond awakens more than just sentiment. A pity it's a borrowed strength." Robert shook off the shock, his eyes blazing with new fury. "You dare!" He advanced, but more cautiously now. "Your parlor tricks won't save you. You are my blood, my property." "I am no one's property," Peyton shouted, her hand closing around the cold iron of the poker. It was heavy, solid, real. The bond thrummed, feeding her a steady stream of calm amidst the terror. "He is coming. Hold on." A distant, earth-shaking boom rattled the tower. The sound of the fortress's main gates being breached. The battle had reached the inner bailey. Robert's smile returned. "Hear that? That's the sound of your mate's kingdom falling." The entity glided to Robert's side. "Enough! The distraction has served its purpose, but even trifles can become nuisances. Take her. The conduit is prepared." Robert lunged again. This time, Peyton swung the poker. It was clumsy, wild, but fueled by adrenaline and that borrowed instinct. Robert caught it easily, wrenching it from her grasp, but the delay was all the entity needed. It raised both hands, and the air in the center of the room began to tear. It wasn't a door. It was a wound in reality itself, a vertical slit of swirling, bruised purple and void black. A cold wind spilled from it, carrying a smell of ozone and deep, forgotten earth. The sound was a low, psychic hum that vibrated in Peyton's teeth. "What is that?" Robert asked, a flicker of unease finally crossing his bloody features. "The shortcut," the entity said, "to where her power will be uncorked. Bring her." Robert's hand closed on Peyton's arm once more, dragging her toward the rending tear. She fought, kicking, scratching, but he was too strong. The cold from the portal washed over her, and the bond in her chest stretched thin, a thread of gold about to snap. She threw her consciousness down it, a final, desperate scream. "Henry!" As she was hauled to the very edge of the void, the chamber door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Alpha King Henry filled the doorway, a vision of gore and wrath. His armor was dented and smeared, his own blood mixing with that of others. His eyes were pure, radiant amber, fixed not on Robert, but on the entity. The rage on his face was cosmic. "Release my mate!" The command was a shockwave of pure alpha authority, so potent the stone beneath their feet trembled. The entity actually turned, its hood shifting. "Ah, the king of beasts. You are too late. She was never yours to keep. She belongs to an older story." Henry's gaze snapped to Peyton. In that instant, through the bond, she didn't just see his anger. She saw his plan, a reckless, devastating plan. He didn't charge Robert. He charged the entity. With a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, Henry crossed the room in two great bounds, his claws aimed for the creature's heart. The entity moved, faster than sight, but not fast enough. Henry's blow didn't land cleanly, but it connected, shearing through dark robes and meeting something solid beneath that gave with a sickening, unorganic crunch. The entity shrieked, a sound of pure outrage that had no place in a living throat. The magical tear in the room flickered, destabilizing. Robert, seeing his ally struck, roared and threw Peyton aside. She hit the floor, rolling, as he launched himself at Henry's exposed back. It was the moment Henry had gambled on. As Robert committed to the attack, Henry pivoted, not to block, but to grab. He caught Robert's leading arm, used his momentum, and in a display of brutal, efficient strength, he broke Robert's wrist with a snap that echoed louder than the battle outside. Robert howled in agony. Henry drove a knee into his gut, then a fist into his jaw, dropping the alpha of the Silvermane pack to his knees. But the distraction cost him. The entity, wounded but not defeated, recovered. It didn't attack Henry. It pointed a trembling finger at the unstable portal. "If I cannot have the catalyst, then no one will." It funneled a bolt of crackling, violet energy not at Henry, but at the base of the portal tier. The tier shuddered. And then it expanded, whirling out of control, the edges ripping wider, becoming a growing maw of nothingness. The pull of it became gravitational, sucking tapestries from the walls, dragging furniture toward its event horizon. Henry staggered, bracing against the pull. Robert, on the floor, screamed as he was dragged several feet toward the void. The entity itself began to back toward the tier, as if retreating into it. Peyton scrambled to her feet, clutching the leg of the heavy bed. The wind tore at her hair and clothes. She locked eyes with Henry across the chaos. His rage was gone, replaced by a terrifying, calculated resolve. He was going to try to close it. He was going to get sucked in. No, the word was a vow in her soul, mine. And in that moment of absolute refusal, something within her answered. Not the mate bond. Something deeper, older, and ice-cold. It uncoiled from the core of her being, a silent, potent wave of negation. It was instinctual, a command she didn't know she could give. Stop. The expanding portal didn't stop, but it hesitated. For one single, frozen second, the chaotic whirl of colors and void stuttered, like a film skipping a frame. The violent pull faltered. The entity, halfway into the tier, let out a gasp of shock. Its hood turned fully toward Peyton for the first time, and within the darkness, 2 pinpricks of violet light flared. You touched it," it breathed, a sound of perverse awe. "With a thought." Henry didn't waste the opening. He roared, channeling his own immense power, a golden, tangible force of will, and slammed it into the edges of the tier. The 2 opposing energies, Henry's golden will and the entity's dying violet magic, collapsed inward. The portal imploded, with a soundless pressure wave pop. The force of the backlash threw everyone to the floor. The entity was gone, severed from this world. Robert lay groaning, clutching his broken wrist. Henry was on one knee, breathing heavily, a thin trickle of blood from his nose. The room was a wreck, but silent save for the ragged breaths of the living. Peyton pushed herself up, her body trembling not with fear, but with the aftershock of what she had just done. She had touched something inside her, and it had listened. Henry was at her side in an instant, his hands cupping her face, his eyes scanning her for injury. "Peyton, look at me, are you hurt?" She shook her head, words failing her. She just stared into his eyes, the bond swelling with his relief, his lingering fury, his awe. A low, pained laugh bubbled from Robert on the floor. They both turned. He was struggling to sit up, his face a mask of pain and mad triumph. "You see," he coughed, blood on his lips. "You felt it, girl, that power, that's mine. I bred it into you. I made you." Henry moved to stand over him, a final judgment in his eyes. but Robert's gaze was locked on Peyton, feverish and possessive. "He can't protect you from what you are, and he won't use you, not like I will. This isn't over. She's awakened it now. They'll all come for you. Every ancient thing that sleeps in the dark, they felt that." The words were a curse. Before Henry could act, Robert, with his last strength, slammed his good fist onto an amulet hidden beneath his tunic. It shattered, releasing a pulse of silvery, familiar magic, a teleportation charm, a twin to the one that had brought him here. "No," Henry snarled, swiping a claw, but it passed through empty air. Robert Silvermane vanished, leaving only a smear of blood and his final, echoing threat hanging in the ravaged chamber. Silence descended, broken only by the moan of the wind through the shattered door and the distant, dying sounds of the concluded battle. Peyton looked from the empty space where her father had been to the spot where the portal had raged. Her skin felt too tight, her blood singing with a strange, cold echo. Henry pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "He's gone. The fortress is secure. Cale is dead. The rebellion is broken." But his words were just sounds. All she could hear was Robert's voice and the terrifying truth in it. "They'll all come for you." She had stopped a portal with a thought. She had a power she didn't understand. And she had just announced its awakening to every ancient thing that sleeps in the dark. Peyton buried her face in Henry's neck. The scent of him, of safety and mate, the only anchor in a suddenly infinite, terrifying universe. The battle for the throne was over. But as she felt the new, cold power slumbering restlessly in her veins, she knew with utter certainty that their real war had just begun. And the next enemy wouldn't be waiting at the gates. It would be coming from a place with no gates at all. The silence after the portal's collapse was a physical thing, thick with the scent of ozone, blood, and spent power. Peyton stared at the empty space where the shimmering tear had been, her father's final, venomous promise echoing in the stillness. They are awake now. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a strange, humming energy just beneath her skin. If only she had known that silencing one monster was just the prelude to the chorus. A low groan cut through the quiet. Delaney stirred on the floor, clutching her head. Henry was already moving, his presence a solid, warm anchor against the psychic chill left by the entity. He didn't go to his fallen guard first. He came to Peyton. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice rough. His hands, stained with Robert's blood and the entity's dark ichor, framed her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. His amber eyes scanned hers, searching for damage deeper than the physical. The mate bond between them was no longer a quiet stream but a roaring river, and through it she felt his terror, a king's fear for his heart laid bare. "I'm here," she whispered, the words tasting like a vow. "I'm whole." He exhaled, a shudder running through his powerful frame, and rested his forehead against hers. For 3 heartbeats, the world narrowed to that point of contact, the shared breath, the synchronized pound of their hearts. Mine, her soul, and her newly awakened power sang in agreement. The moment shattered with the sound of booted feet pounding up the tower stairs. Henry straightened, his regal mask slamming back into place, but he kept one hand on the small of Peyton's back. A unit of guards, led by a grizzled warrior with a fresh scar across his jaw, burst into the chamber, weapons drawn. They took in the scene. The scorched floor, the unconscious Delaney, the blood, the king holding the trembling girl. "Sire," the scarred guard barked, "the breach is sealed. The rebel force is routed. Alpha Cale Nightfang is dead." Henry gave a single, sharp nod. "Casualties? Light on our side, heavy on theirs. The Silvermane and Nightfang remnants are scattering into the forest. They are leaderless." "No," Henry said, his voice like grinding stone. "They have a leader. Robert Silvermane escaped this chamber. He is wounded, but he is out there. He is now the paramount enemy of the crown." He looked down at Peyton, his gaze softening a fraction. "And he is a threat to my mate. I want a full sweep of the fortress. Every stone, every passage. Then triple the patrols on the perimeter. No one sleeps tonight." The guards saluted and began to efficiently clear the room, too moving to carefully assist a dazed Delaney to her feet. Henry turned to his head guard. "Delaney, report!" She winced, touching the bruise forming on her temple. "He was too fast, sire. The entity. It wasn't a physical blow. It was like the shadows themselves reached into my mind and shut it off. I failed. You faced an enemy outside of all our lore. The failure is not yours," Henry said, but his tone was distant, already strategizing. "Get to the healers, then return to your post outside these chambers. No one enters but you or me. Is that clear?" "Yes, my king." Delaney's eyes found Peyton's, a mix of apology and fierce resolve in them before she allowed herself to be led away. Finally, they were alone again in the ravaged chamber. The wind whistled through the open balcony doors, carrying the distant, fading cries of battle and the iron-rich smell of the night. Henry guided Peyton to the edge of the large bed, sitting her down before crouching in front of her, his warrior's physique making the posture seem both dominant and strangely supplicant. "Tell me everything you felt," he said, his voice low. "Not just with your senses, with that." He gestured vaguely toward her. Peyton swallowed, looking at her palms as if they might glow. "It was like a door I never knew was there blew open inside me. When the portal was pulling me in, I could feel its structure. The magic wasn't just energy. It had a pattern like threads, and I knew instinctively that if I pulled on the right thread—" She mimicked a plucking motion with her fingers. "It would fray, so I did. I just thought it and it listened." Henry's expression was grave. "You commanded a magic older than our kind. Your father called it your inheritance. What did the entity say to you, exactly, before I arrived?" She closed her eyes, the haunting, multi-voiced whisper replaying. "You are the key, little catalyst. The lock awaits." She repeated it aloud, the words feeling dangerous in the air. "It said my mother's blood was a river of stars and silence, that she hid me in wolf's clothing." Her eyes snapped open, filled with a sudden, painful hope. "Henry, my mother, she wasn't just a werewolf, was she?" The look on his face was all the confirmation she needed. It was a mixture of pity and grim understanding. "I never knew her. Her name was erased from your pack records by your father, a detail I only discovered when I began having dreams. Visions of a woman with your eyes, standing under a sky that was not our own, long before you collapsed into my arms at that cursed ritual." "Dreams," Peyton breathed. "The mate bond begins in the soul, long before it manifests in the flesh," he said, taking her hands in his. His were warm, steadying. "For years I felt a pull, an incompleteness. I searched for its source and found only whispers. Whispers of a Silvermane alpha who took a strange, beautiful mate from beyond the territories. Whispers that she died in childbirth, and her daughter showed no trace of her legacy. Until now." Peyton's mind reeled. Her entire life, her perceived weakness, her lack of a wolf, it wasn't an absence. It was a dam holding back an ocean of something else. And her father had been the engineer, doping her with wolfsbane to keep the dam from cracking. He always knew what I was. He didn't just sell me to Kale to buy peace. He was getting rid of a volatile asset before it could detonate, or waiting for it to mature. The horror of it was a cold knife in her gut. "He said he bred you for it," Henry growled, the sound reverberating in his chest. "He and that thing, they are working in concert. The rebellion was a feint, a distraction to draw my forces to the walls so the entity could slip in here unseen. They wanted you, Peyton, specifically you, not to kill you, to use you. As a key," she finished, the weight of it crushing. To open what lock and for who? Before Henry could answer, a new sound intruded, a rhythmic, frantic thumping from the stone wall near the fireplace. It was a hollow, secret sound. Both of them shot to their feet, Henry instantly shifting to place himself between Peyton and the noise. The thumping came again, followed by a muffled, desperate voice. "My king, please, if you can hear me, it's Jonathan." Peyton's blood ran cold. The traitor Beta. Henry's lip curled, but he strode to the wall, running his hands over the ancient stones. He found a nearly invisible seam, pressed, and a section of the wall swung inward with a groan of disused hinges, revealing a narrow, dark servant's passage. Crumpled in the dust and shadows was Jonathan. He was a wreck, his fine clothes torn, one eye swollen shut, his wrists raw and bound with a strange, glowing silver cord that seemed to burn his skin. He gasped at the sight of Henry, his one good eye wide with a terror that seemed utterly genuine. "Sire, thank the moon," Jonathan panted. Henry didn't move to help him. His voice was ice. "You have 3 seconds to explain why I shouldn't kill you where you lie." "The entity," Jonathan choked out. "After you spared me, after I delivered your warning to the forest edge, it found me. It said I had outlived my usefulness to Robert. It bound me with this magic. It forced me to lead it back here through the passages I knew. It was inside my head, making me walk." He was sobbing now, a broken, pathetic sound. "It wanted me to see. It said to tell her that the invitation is sent." Peyton stepped forward, despite Henry's warning hand. "What invitation?" Jonathan's weeping eye found hers. "To the convergence, at the standing stones of the first howl, when the moon is dark in 3 nights' time." He struggled against the glowing cords. "It said your awakening was a beacon, that the quiet ones have heard it. They are coming to see the key for themselves, to decide if you will open the way or be broken before you can try." The dread that filled the room was palpable. Henry grabbed Jonathan by the front of his tunic, hauling him up. "Who are the quiet ones?" "I don't know, ancient things older than wolves, things that sleep in the earth and the deep woods. The entity serves them or courts them, I don't know," Jonathan babbled. "Robert plans to be there. He said with you by his side, they would have no choice but to grant him dominion. That a father's claim on his child's power is an older law." No, the words screamed in Peyton's mind, not in fear, but in a rising, defiant fury. She was not a child. She was not a key. She was Peyton Silvermane, mate of the Alpha King, and she was filled with a storm. Henry dropped Jonathan back to the floor. "Lock him in the black cells. Keep him bound. He may yet be of use." As guards dragged the weeping Beta away, Henry turned to Peyton. The strategic calm on his face was at odds with the storm she could feel through their bond. A tempest of protective fury and looming, monumental dread. "The standing stones are a day's hard ride from here," he said. "It is sacred, neutral ground for all packs, a place of treaty and truce. By ancient custom, any may attend a convergence called there." "So it's a trap," Peyton stated flatly. "It's a gauntlet," Henry corrected, his eyes blazing. "They are using the oldest of our laws to frame their play. If we do not go, you will be branded a threat to all werewolf kind, a beacon for monsters, and I will be seen as weak for hiding you. My rule would fracture. If we do go, we walk into an assembly of beings whose power we do not understand, with your father waiting to claim you." Peyton walked to the balcony, looking out over the moonlit fortress. The battle was over, but the war had just transformed. It was no longer about pack against pack. It was about what it meant to be a wolf. It was about what she was. The humming power inside her seemed to resonate with the distant, sleeping forest. "We have to go," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Henry came to stand behind her, his heat at her back. I know. I won't be his weapon. I won't be a key for some ancient horror. You will be what you choose to be, Henry murmured into her hair. And I will be at your side, my army at our backs. But his words sparked a new, terrifying thought in her mind. She turned within the circle of his arms. What if that's the problem? What if bringing an army of wolves to a convergence of these quiet ones is exactly what provokes the war they want? What if it has to be just us? Henry stared at her, conflict raging in his eyes. The king knew the value of show of force. The mate felt the terrifying truth in her proposition. To face the ancient and the unknown, they might have to stand alone. The decision was torn from them by a sudden, unnatural phenomenon. From the distant forest line, where the rebel forces had scattered, a pillar of eerie, sourceless green light shot into the sky. It didn't illuminate. It seemed to swallow the light around it. It held for 5 silent seconds, then vanished. A moment later, a wave of pure, psychic nausea washed over the fortress. Peyton staggered, and Henry clutched her, a growl ripping from his throat. Every dog in the kennels, every wolf in the garrison howled in unison, a sound of primal distress. When the feeling passed, leaving a ringing silence in its wake, a single, perfectly white feather drifted down from the empty sky, landing on the balcony stone between them. It was not from any bird native to the territory. It glimmered with a faint, otherworldly sheen. Peyton bent and picked it up. It was cold, and it hummed against her skin with a familiar alien magic, an invitation, a receipt. The convergence had been announced, not just to them, but to the world. Henry's communicator buzzed on his belt. He snatched it up. The voice on the other end was the scarred guard, taut with confusion. "Sire, scouts report changes in the deep forest. The trees around the standing stones, they're not right. They look the same, but they feel watchful, and the shadows are moving on their own. Hold position. Observe. Do not engage," Henry ordered, his eyes locked on the feather in Peyton's hand. He ended the call. The cliffside wind moaned around the tower, sounding less like air and more like a distant, gathering sigh. The safe walls of the fortress no longer felt like protection. They felt like a cage, and the lock was about to be turned from the outside. Peyton met his gaze, the feather cold in her fist. "They're already here, aren't they?" Henry's jaw was a hard line. "They have been here all along, sleeping, and we, howling at the moon, never heard them dreaming." He took her hand, the one not clutching the feather. "We leave at first light, not with the army, you and I. Delaney will follow at a distance with a small, elite unit. We will meet this at the stones." It was a colossal risk. A king leaving his seat of power to walk into a transparent trap. But the rules had changed. The board itself had shifted. What happened next would change everything. As they stood there, planning their approach to the standing stones, neither of them noticed the subtle shift in the reflection of the chamber's firelight on the polished floor. For a fraction of a second, the flames did not flicker with the wind. They twisted, independently, into the shape of a single, watching eye. It winked out as soon as it formed. The entity was gone, but it had left more than just a message. It had left a door ajar in the world. And from the dark on the other side, something had already begun to peek through. The green light from the forest faded, but the silence it left behind was worse. It was a listening silence. Peyton stood at the window of the west tower, Henry a solid, warm presence at her back, his hand on her shoulder. The psychic wave had passed, but the echo of it, a chorus of ancient, hungry minds brushing against hers, lingered like a stain on the air. "They're awake," she thought, "and they're waiting for me." "3 nights," Henry said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "The standing stones are a day's ride. We leave at first light, alone." What happened next would change everything. But first, they had to survive the night. The fortress was a wound, bleeding tension. The scent of blood, iron, and pine from the battle still clung to the lower courtyards, mingling with the sharp odor of fear from the remaining guards. Delaney had reported the perimeter secure, but her eyes, when she brought a tray of food to the chamber, were shadowed. "The forest is too quiet, my king. Not a bird, not a cricket. It's holding its breath." Peyton picked at the food, her stomach a knot. Her power, that strange new sense that had allowed her to unravel the entity's portal, lay dormant but watchful inside her. It felt like a second heartbeat, slow and deep. "My mother," she said, not for the first time. "You said your dreams showed you a river of stars and silence. Did you ever see her face?" Henry sat opposite her, his gaze intense. "No, only a feeling, a profound, protective sorrow, and you at the center of it, wrapped in a light that was both wolf and something more. For years, I thought I was dreaming of a symbol, a hope for our kind. Then I felt you collapse at the ritual, and I knew." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. The mate bond surged, a warm, golden current between them, so different from the cold, grasping tendrils of the quiet one's summons. It carried his conviction, his fear for her, his unwavering resolve. "Mine," her wolf whispered, and for the first time Peyton thought, yes, and he is mine. A sudden sharp crack echoed from the distant forest, like a giant tree snapping. They both flinched. Henry was on his feet in an instant, a growl building in his chest. Peyton's new senses flared outward without her command. She didn't hear another sound, but she felt it. A shift in the ancient, slumbering magic of the land, a tectonic grating deep in the earth that traveled up through the stone floor and into her bones. "They're not waiting 3 nights," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're moving the stones to us." The journey was a silent, desperate race against a darkening sky. They rode hard, leaving the fortress with only the clothes on their backs and the weapons they carried. Henry's great black warhorse ate up the miles, while Peyton clung to him, her face buried against his back, the wind whipping her hair. The forest they passed through was a dead place. No scuttling creatures, no owls, no rustle of life. Even the air grew stale and thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and damp stone. If only she had known what that silence truly heralded. They reached the valley of the standing stones as the last bloody light of sunset bled from the sky. The sight stole Peyton's breath. The stones, monoliths that should have stood in a wide, peaceful circle, were now glowing with that same sickly green light. They had moved, leaning inward like grasping fingers, forming a jagged crown around the central altar stone. The space within pulsed with a wrong, rhythmic light, and there were figures in the circle. Not just Robert. He stood by the altar, one arm bandaged from Henry's bite, his face a mask of fanatical triumph. But around him, shimmering in and out of solidity, were shapes of mist and shadow and twisted bark. The quiet ones. They had no true form, but their attention was a physical weight, centering on Peyton as Henry reined the horse to a skidding halt at the valley's edge. "Dismount," Henry ordered, his voice stripped of all but command. "Stay behind me until I say." "Henry, until I say." He turned, his eyes blazing gold. The love in his gaze was ferocious. "You are my heart, but you are also the key. We play this their way until we break their game." They approached on foot. The grass crunched brittle underfoot, frozen despite the season. The green light made everything look drowned. "Daughter," Robert's voice boomed, amplified by the circle's magic. "You are late for your inheritance." "You are a trespasser here, Robert Silvermane," Henry's voice rolled out, not as loud, but carrying the full authority of the crown. It cracked against the green magic like a whip. "This sacred ground is under my protection. You and these things defile it." A ripple of cold laughter moved through the shimmering figures. One of them, a form that seemed woven from root and twilight, solidified slightly. Its voice was the sound of grinding stones. Protection. A cub king barks at the tide. The girl is a catalyst. Her blood calls to older laws. The treaty of flesh and spirit, signed by her mother's line, demands a convergence. She will be uncorked. Peyton's power stirred, a defensive flare. She saw it now, the magical architecture of the circle. It was a lock, and she was indeed the key. The knowledge came unbidden from that deep, silent place her mother had left within her. Henry took another step forward, placing himself directly between Peyton and the nearest stone. Her name is Peyton, and she is under my law, the law of the fated bond. You have no claim. We have the only claim that matters, hissed another entity, this one like coiled smoke. The claim of precedent. Before wolf there was shadow. Before pack there was the solitary song. She is a child of that song, hidden in a pelt of teeth and claw. We will return her to her nature. Robert could contain himself no longer. Enough talk! You promised me dominion. Her power, channeled through my bloodline, will make me a god among wolves. Begin the rite. He gestured wildly. The green light intensified, beams lancing from stone to stone, forming a cage of energy. The air hummed, and Peyton felt a terrible, pulling suction from the circle, focused on the core of power within her chest. It was trying to draw it out. Henry roared. It was the sound of mountains breaking. He shifted, not in a blur of pain, but in an explosion of deliberate, terrifying power. Clothes shredded, bones reknitting with audible snaps, fur the color of midnight storming over muscle and sinew. In 2 heartbeats, the Alpha King stood in his full, primal wolf form, larger than any natural beast, eyes like molten suns. He launched himself not at the entities, but at the nearest standing stone. His claws, glowing with his own royal power, scored deep gouges into the ancient, enchanted rock. The green light flickered. The entity connected to that stone screamed, a sound of shattered glass and pain. Chaos. The other entities converged on Henry, streams of shadow and force battering against him. He moved with impossible speed, a whirlwind of tooth and claw, his every strike disrupting their semi-corporeal forms. But they were many. A tendril of mist wrapped around his hind leg, and he stumbled. Robert saw his chance. He shifted into his own wolf form, a large, silver-gray beast, but one that seemed coarse and weak next to Henry's majesty, and lunged, not at the king, but around the fray, straight for Peyton. Now Peyton, Henry's voice roared in her mind through the bond. The lock, see it. The world slowed. The battering magic, the snarling wolves, the screaming entities, it all faded to a blur. Peyton's vision shifted. She no longer saw just stone and light. She saw the lines of power, the intricate, cruel weave of the spell that formed the lock. It was connected to every stone, and at its heart to the altar where Robert had stood. And she saw the keyhole. It was her. The instinct rose, pure and clear. She did not have to be pulled. She could push. Robert was feet away, jaws gaping to seize her. She could smell his rancid ambition, his hatred. Peyton's Silvermane stopped retreating. She planted her feet on the dead earth, looked at the monster who had sired her, and let go of her fear. She reached into herself, to that river of stars and silence, and she commanded. A soundless pulse of silver-blue light exploded from her. It did not burn or destroy. It unraveled. It touched the green web of magic, and where it touched, the strands dissolved into harmless sparks. The standing stones groaned, their inward lean halting, the sickly light snuffing out from the base up. Robert, mid-leap, was caught in the peripheral wave. He was thrown sideways as if by a giant's hand, yelping in shock and pain, his connection to the entity's borrowed magic severed. The quiet ones shrieked in unison, a sound of profound, cosmic dismay. The key turns itself. The lock rejects us. Their forms wavered, destabilizing. Henry, seizing the moment, tore free of the dissolving bindings and surged toward the most solid of the entities. His jaws closed on its core of coalesced shadow. There was a sound like a dying star, and the entity burst into a shower of cold, black ash that vanished before it hit the ground. The others recoiled. The circle was broken. The sacred ground was returning to itself, the stones just stone again under the rising light of the true moon. Panting, Henry shifted back to his human form, blood streaking his skin from a dozen shallow cuts. He staggered to Peyton, who was swaying on her feet, the silver light fading from her skin and eyes. He caught her, holding her up. "You did it," he breathed into her hair. "My brilliant, brave mate." But it wasn't over. A guttural snarl drew their attention. Robert, back in human form, clutching his side, was crawling toward the now-dark altar stone. On it lay a simple, weathered dagger made of obsidian, which had not been there before. The last remnant of the entity's magic. "My destiny," he rasped. "Mine, I will have it. I will cut it from your heart if I must." He stumbled to his feet, dagger raised, and charged. Henry moved to intercept, but Peyton was closer. And the bond gave her his instincts. She saw the opening, felt the trajectory. As Robert plunged the dagger down toward Henry's exposed back, Peyton did not scream. She stepped. Her hand shot out, not to block the blade, but to grip Robert's wrist. Skin to skin, father to daughter. Her power, now awake and acknowledged, did not unravel this time. It revealed. Images, emotions, truths flooded from her into Robert, and from him into her. She saw his first meeting with her mother, not love, but avaricious fascination with her power. She saw his calculated seduction, his bitter disappointment when Peyton was born seemingly human, his decision to suppress her and sell her as a pawn. She felt his utter lack of love, only a cold, possessive greed. And he saw from her. He felt the crushing weight of his neglect, the terror of the ritual, the warmth of the mate bond he had tried to steal, the soaring strength of the power he had sought to own. He felt her pity for him. With a final, desperate wrench, Peyton twisted his wrist. The obsidian dagger clattered to the stone. Robert stared at her, his eyes wide with something beyond hatred, with a horrified understanding. He had created and he had lost. Everything. "You are nothing to me," Peyton said, her voice clear and cold as the moonlit stone between them. "You are no alpha. You are no father. You are a ghost, and this kingdom has no room for ghosts." Henry's hand came down on Robert's shoulder. Robert Silvermane, for treason, for trafficking a royal mate, for consorting with ancient enemies to the detriment of all werewolf kind, I sentence you to exile. Your name is struck from the rolls. Your pack is dissolved. If you are ever found within any territory of the crown, you will be executed on sight. He shoved Robert away, toward the dark forest. Robert stumbled, looked back once at Peyton's unforgiving face, at the king who stood as her unshakable pillar, and at the silent, reproachful stones. Then, with a broken sound, he turned and fled into the shadows, a ghost indeed. The silence that followed was the true, clean silence of night. The oppressive weight was gone. Crickets tentatively began to chirp in the distant trees. Henry pulled Peyton into his arms, holding her as she trembled, not from fear now, but from release. The battle was over. The trap was sprung and broken. The ancient things had been pushed back into their deep, dark places, their laws answered and found wanting against the newer, stronger laws of bond and heart. "It's done," he murmured. "No," she said, leaning back to look up at him, a weary but genuine smile touching her lips. "It's just beginning for us, for our kingdom." He kissed her then, under the moon that had witnessed their claiming, in the circle that had failed to claim her. It was a promise. Weeks later, the fortress felt new. The scars of battle were being healed, physically and in spirit. Delaney had been promoted to captain of the Royal Guard. Jonathan, freed from the entity's control but burdened by his choices, had been sentenced to lifelong service in the fortress kitchens, his every move watched. Peyton stood on the high observatory, now a place of peace, not peril. The forest was alive with sound and scent. Her power was a quiet, settled thing inside her, a part of her she was learning to understand with Henry by her side. Her wolf, no longer latent, ran joyful and free within her spirit. Henry joined her, sliding his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her head. "A rider from the former Silvermane lands," he said. "They have accepted the crown's governance. They ask after their lost Alpha's daughter." She leaned into him. "What did you tell them?" "I told them their Luna is well, and that she and their king are coming to visit next moon to see about rebuilding, together." The word hung in the air, rich with meaning. Together. It was the answer to every ritual, every challenge, every ancient law. It was the bond that had saved them, and the future they would build. Peyton turned in his arms, meeting his golden eyes, seeing her own reflection, strong, loved, powerful, within them. "Together," she agreed. And as the sun set, painting the sky in colors of fire and hope, the Alpha King and his catalytic queen stood watch over their waking world, ready for whatever beginning came next.